Hello, I'm Shirley Adams, and this is the fourth program of the series, Jigsaw. As a little girl, one of my favorite activities was putting together a jigsaw puzzle. I still find it fun, but this time around I'm creating my own puzzles, such as the vest I'm wearing. And here are some of the starting thoughts on the subject. We need to consider what is frequently referred to as the flamboyance factor. How flamboyantly can you dress and still feel perfectly comfortable about wearing that article? Could you wear this or not? Well, that may be dependent on, for one thing, the area encompassed. A big coat, I decided no, a big coat I couldn't go this time around. But maybe a smaller article, like a vest or an accessory. The color is another factor. Not only the hue, the name of the color, but the value and intensity, how light or dark it is, how bright or dull it is, and the contrast between the pieces. For example, this that I have down here on the table. Now this is pretty intense. All these colors are very bright or else very dark. If I would throw this pink in, which is the same color as one of the others, it just doesn't go at all. It doesn't agree in value and intensity, so it's not a good idea. Here is one that is the very same design, but look how completely different it looks by the time we get all these somber colors in. Is this easier for you to wear? There is a lot of dullness here, and it might be easier as a beginning before you get really flamboyant about it. And then the design, when it pulls together, when it's unified, when everything sort of seems to be circled out here and as one, then it's more comfortable to wear. So think something unified. Are straight lines, however, more comfortable for you than curvy lines, as I've been showing you? Would this very straight line thing be easier? Would balanced designs feel better than asymmetrical? Is traditional more to your liking than contemporary? So consider all these factors and decide what exactly you could wear. Really analyze the problem and come to some conclusion. As far as traditional goes, this is the only traditional thing that I've done. Now, I love quilting. I have a whole shelf full of quilting books, which I haven't had time to read. But I went ahead and made this log cabin, this little tabard on the dress. And as I showed this in a seminar, some woman pointed out to me, that center block, that's always red. That's the warmth of the family, the hearth of the home, and therefore it's red. Mine's blue. Sorry, I guess my fire burned out. But what that told me is next time, don't do any traditional quilting until you read that shelf full of books and learn what it's all about. So here I am doing contemporary things, no rules involved. Do what you please and don't worry about breaking any rules. Well, basically how this is done is just draw some design. Here I have a very simple design. I cut it apart then, and the pieces I cut in fabric, and I've pinned those pieces on top of a piece of fleece, and under that fleece I have some backing fabric, so it's all going to be one, just the same as my vest is. It's all one piece, no lining or anything. You do it all at once, so it's quick and easy. And then I have all these raw edges. I'm not going to turn them under. What I'm going to do with them instead is just cover them up with some bias. And the reason you use bias, and I'll show you how to make that in a minute, is so that it curves around, because it does that nicely. It just curves around all those parts, and it's very easy to do. So I'll stitch a little bit of this bias piece on to show you how easily it does curve, even though it isn't pinned. It can just curve as you go, very nicely in place. And so there's one side. I won't bother to do the other side at this time. And then later this would be covered up as I curve the other piece around. So as I curve this around, everything gets covered up and it looks finished. And it's very easy. Everybody can do this successfully, and it's fun to do besides. Well, as far as that design goes, this is where the important part is. This is the planning stage. And you really have to plan carefully to do whatever you're going to do to make it come out right in the end. So here are some of the practice things I did first of all, and what I was doing with these is trying to decide what colors I wanted together. When I did this little patch, I decided those two white ones pretty well stand out. I don't know if I want to include them, so I might exclude them and put some different things in. This, I like the colors. I decided, okay, they're all kind of close values, they all kind of go together nicely. But then what I tried on this is what kind of bias tape I was going to use, whether it's going to be this type as I used over on this one, or whether it's going to be a little red as I used here. So make yourself some samples so that you can get all those decisions out of the way. Also, you're going to decide maybe how you apply them, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. First of all, as far as drawing the design goes, I drew this design on this side of the bag first. And after I had that design all made, all finished, I decided, you know what's wrong with that, is that there's no unity here. It just sort of flies off in every direction, and it does that for a reason. I started in one end, I guess, and just started putting pieces of fabric across and drew the design just across. I didn't think it out too well, so I thought, no, that's not the best. Then second, I did this vest that I'm wearing, and here I did somewhat better. I, for instance, did plan where the pockets should go. I put that right into the design so that you could see the pockets, or so that they would be concealed right in the design. So that seemed like a good idea. I was thinking somewhat here. I also did this red piece so that it crossed right over where the opening is, and in that way it showed some unity of design. So I liked this better. And then the piece that I liked the very best was the last one I did, the other side of the bag. And this one I like so much better because it all seems to flow. It all belongs together. I used similar values in colors. They were all kind of somber reds. So everything that I put in here I like better. I planned ahead to put this pocket so that I can either, put knitting needles or whatever if I'm going to be carrying my knitting in it, or to put an airline ticket in if I'm going to be running through an airport with this. So it all works. And this is where I'm showing you now, so that hopefully yours will work out to your liking also. So first of all, the first step is going to be drawing the design, and I take a piece of paper that's the size of the finished project. If you're using a pattern for something, then of course you use that pattern. Here, this was a vest pattern that I used, a commercial pattern. I first of all traced it on another piece of paper. I drew the design I want so that I could cut all that up and use those pieces as patterns to cut my other fabric. So first I did this, draw a design, the right size. Then I took little scraps of fabric and kind of just filled them in here and there without attaching them in any way. I would put one little bundle there and see what I liked going next to it and do some planning like this. Play around with this fabric. I like it better on this side, so I'd put it here. But play around with those and decide exactly what goes right together before you then do any anchoring. Then some different ways to put that on the fabric that I've done. I read an article not too long ago where they used spray glue to put it on. And with this one, I tried some spray glue over here. I tried spray glue on this one, and it worked very nicely. I glued all those fabric pieces before I put it down, but I found that my hands had to really be washed about 3 or 4 times to get that glue off where I was holding it slightly. It made a little residue around that I didn't like, so perhaps I used a different brand than the article I read. But I decided, no, that's not my way, because there are always so many ways to do something. What I did here was just pin it, the same as I did that little sample on the machine a minute ago. I simply pinned it on top, and that worked well, and in fact that's how I did this whole vest. And then after I got finished with it, I thought of a much better way that I should have done it in the first place. How about doing this pattern on Wonder Under, just tracing it that way and fusing all the pieces down? That would be a good way to do it, as long as it doesn't stiffen it too much. So try that out and see if it is going to be too stiff. Here I just have these placed down here. Well, if I would trace this on Wonder Under, let me pull another piece out here. If I would use this and trace it on Wonder Under, okay, here's the Wonder Under, or any of the transfer sheets that you can remove. If I would just trace it on here, then I could cut out these individual pieces and put them on and just fuse the whole thing down when I'm finished. That's an easier way. Another easy way is what I'm doing right here, cutting out these pieces, placing them down on a piece of Easy Knit with the fusible side up. And that's, I decided, maybe the best idea, because once it's finished, once you have it all fused in place, and of course I'm going to put everything in place, I made these so that they have slightly overlapping edges. And the way I did that is when I cut out the design, instead of cutting it right on the little pattern pieces, I cut it slightly bigger everywhere so that they would overlap a little bit, and that made it easier. So with these, they are overlapping, everything's just right, so that I can press this down now with the iron and get it all fused in place once I have it completely covered. I'd wait until that point to really fuse it. But after I have that all fused in place, what I'm going to have is this that I was working with, or that I was showing you with in the first place. This is all fused to a piece of Wonder Under. So the whole thing's in place. All I need to do now is put it on top of my fleece and to put it on top of my lining fabric, put a few pins in it, and then I'm ready to go, and it'll be a very quick job to get everything right. So this is the easiest yet for me. It may not be for you. So you try different things too on a small scrap to see what works out best for you. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in here to hold it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is not do any stitching at all on this, but just stitch down the bias tape. So we have to first make a little bias. And I did this in another program to bind something. I did this in a larger scale. I needed larger bias for that. On this, I just need very narrow bias. So you get the very most narrow bias tape maker that you can. The narrowest one I have is about a 1/2 inch. And when I say bias, I mean true bias. That means that when you take your piece of fabric, do fold it so that it forms an L square here, and the fold, of course, is going to be a 45-degree angle. It's going to be true bias. Because what happens if you don't, if you just do partial bias, is it kind of ripples as it goes around there, and it doesn't look pretty at all. So true bias, 45-degree angle is important. So I've cut the pieces of bias that size, and the way I cut these, or the reason I cut them this size, is because my bias tape maker is 1/2 inch wide. That means that I need to cut the actual fabric about 1 inch. And I'm going to pin it here to the board, and I'll back this up to start at the first of it. And it's just a matter of following it then with the iron. And what this neat little gadget does, of course, is fold the edges in to the center. This would be difficult to do uniformly with your hands. You'd also get a steam burn en route, but this way it's just very easy to follow along. If you actually knew what curves you had, you could even press curves into it this way. I don't know in advance, so I'll just do it this way. And then you're ready to sew that on. Now, as you sew this, you need to figure out first, okay, what's going to be under. I, for instance, wouldn't want to sew this complete piece down here and then find that, whoops, I need to insert a little piece here that goes under it. So think ahead when you're doing this. And first of all, put the pieces of bias down that, I'll get out some more bias here that I've made previously. Here's a separate piece. Okay, I'd first of all take this separate piece and put it on the little short length here. And then after I have this sewn down, then I could put this one over it and it would cover up all the raw edges. So think in advance. And what I find is if, for instance, I would sew this one down or start sewing it down and later find out as I'm going that, whoops, I didn't cover that piece up. I need to do that. Okay, have extra pieces of bias tape there so that before you actually sew it down, you can just insert this. It doesn't matter if I don't sew the whole piece down. I can at least just insert it under there, sew past it, and then later on I can pick this up. So that way it makes it very easy to do, and just plan ahead. Just think ahead before you cross any different fabrics. Just think, am I going to have to rip anything out to put some bias under that, or am I doing it as it goes along so that I won't have any work to do later? I'll just get some of this out of the way and do a little stitching here. So as I put this under, I'm going to go ahead and stitch this one down first, and I would stitch that on one side and then down the other side, and usually so that you don't get that rippling that I talked about that you usually get when you have it cut at some other angle other than 45 degrees. But you also can get that little ripple by pulling it out of line. And so if you would, for instance, I'm just seeing where my fabrics go, and they go down like this, so I'll bring this around. If you would, for instance, just turn this around and go back the other way, that's when it has a tendency to ripple, so it's not a good idea. If at all possible, stitch both sides of this bias the same direction so that you don't have any ripples coming into it. So here I'll just stitch the other side down. And everything works out very well that way without the ripples, and then you're ready to cover it with the second piece of tape. So this really doesn't take all that long. It's fun to do. I find now that I'd like to make several other projects because I had such a good time doing this, and that should, of course, be a big part of it. You don't have time to do everything, therefore I'm just going to pin this down for a starter. Therefore, only sew the things that you love to do, the things that are fun, and the rest of them you can find elsewhere. So here I would do a little bit more sewing, and this time I'd cover up the first piece of bias that I put on so that I always have those raw edges covered. And see how easily this does just curve around as I'm going without any problem. And also I eliminated a lot of problems by, in the first place, cutting that on the bias, but pressing everything down flat on the fusible interfacing that's coming up, the fusing was coming up. That eliminated, I found, a whole lot of problems, and it was very easy to do then without getting any wrinkles and little cups and anything else on it. So this is what it's going to end up like. And of course it'd take a little while to do this whole thing, but hopefully you understand what I'm doing here and could do something similar. If, by the way, I find out someplace that, whoops, I'm going to run out of bias and I'm not going to be able to cover up this whole piece that I have here, it's not too much of a problem. I could stop sewing, for instance, right here, and with this big end that I have, I could go ahead and join another piece of bias to it before I keep on stitching. So you can't get into too much trouble if you just sort of keep looking ahead and seeing what's down the road and doing something about the problem before you get to it. Well, I had so much fun doing this, I decided that I would think about what other projects I could do out of the very same design and out of the very same fabrics perhaps, or maybe different fabrics, but here's one that I have done. Now this is pretty flamboyant. This is pretty loud. What this is a maternity top. Much to my delight, I find we're going to be grandparents again. And so what this is going to be is around the house. It's going to be leisure time. And so for leisure time, you can wear something this loud. It's going to be very comfortable. It's going to be just fine. You perhaps wouldn't wear anything this colorful if it would be going out. Also, though, since it is maternity, I tried to draw attention up to the face. I put the brightest colors up there. I chose a fabric, a woven fabric to use as my bias binding here. I chose that first, and then as I chose the other colors that would go with it, I just pulled the colors out of that print fabric. What I was doing there, because I'm not an artist, I was borrowing on the expertise of the artist who designed that print fabric and pulling the same colors out of solid colors to go with it. So this is how you can look very artistic without being an artist. And this is how you can look like you have a lot of color sense, even if you really haven't any. So start out with the print fabric and then build everything around it, and it might be an easy way. Well, something else that I showed you here a minute ago was this. And this I traced on Wonder Under. Now what this is a purse. So here's the finished article. And as I make this purse, I'm going to put a lot of ultra suede pieces on a print background. So to do that, this is the size of the original purse. It's 2 pieces of typing paper taped together actually is what it is. So 8.5 by 11 times 2 is what it is. And then I just played with the paper and I found that, yeah, this was the bag I wanted if I just fold it this way. So I drew the design accordingly. You know, what kind of a design would I like? It's kind of similar to the other designs that I have. And by the way, this t-shirt back here was the very same, I don't know if you realized it, as the original bag that I did. Maybe I better pull this out and show you that I actually do have the same design. This bag, because I'm not an artist, if I draw a design I like, I'll stay with it a while. So this particular design I have here all over again, but the reverse way, since I fused that on with a fusible web, but it's the very same design, just right to left. It's just transposed is all. But here this is making use of a design that you like to use again because you don't want to keep doing different ones. It also might be making use of some techniques or some ideas that you learned on the first. Well, this one is very similar. It looks almost the same. I've just sort of condensed it to a small size. And what I did to draw this design is start with some central thing. The central thing being where I was going to attach this little buckle to hook the purse. So I started out with something here, and then I continued that around here. So this is where I started. Made something here, some means to connect this little buckle that I'm putting on here. And after I had that means all attached there, then I let the rest of the design flow around it. Then after this was traced, as I cut this out, I didn't actually use these pieces completely as they were because I was putting these ultra suede pieces on the print background and I wanted a little bit of the print showing between all of them. So after I cut out each piece, this one for instance, after I cut this completely out, then I went back and trimmed off maybe a 1/4 inch or so of it and eliminated that, so that when the two pieces would be together, you could see the other fabric coming through as it does here. You can see the design coming through. Now this also is not being an artist when you do something of this sort. You can do it if you just get some sort of a fabric as inspiration, as I've used this print fabric back here, and it inspired me then to do sort of a paisley type design here. And after I had that design all fused on the background, then it was an easy matter of tracing. Now what was nice about this, and I'll just cut out a few pieces, not even necessarily with the pattern, I'll just cut out a few pieces and show you how it works. Well, maybe we will trace that pattern. Maybe we'll just put it down here and trace a little bit. I'm tracing this on the back side, by the way, because you can't actually draw very easily with a pen in most cases on the right side. So I'll trace this. And if I trace this pattern around here, and then cut out the pieces, and then cut out those same pieces from ultra suede, I'm going to fuse them on something I used in a former show, this tapestry, this vest fabric. So we shall cut that very quickly because you have to cut this pattern apart before you can fuse it on the fabric, since you're going to use several different colors. So okay. Cut this one out, cut this one out. Make some daylight in between since I don't really want them to touch each other. And then I'm going to fuse this to the back side of this one perhaps. And this one that I have cut out here, I don't want that little scrap, that 1/4 inch that I cut away. This one that joins the blue, I'm going to cut a little away of that too over on this side. But you can see when you start putting it together what you need to cut more away of. I find that my scrap here is not big enough, so that's not too tragic. Perhaps I can do something of this sort. I can make a little extra blip in here, and now I find that it will fit on my scrap that I have to fuse, and it'll work out just right. So go ahead and fuse these. Now ordinarily you don't put the iron down on fusible or on synthetic suedes. But here I am because this is the back side and it isn't all that tragic. And I'm only fusing this hard enough so that I can cut it out and peel off the backing and do something else with it. So I'll cut this out. I'm doing this a little bit carelessly. Do yours very carefully. You don't have the time limitations. So okay, I'll cut this one out and I'll cut the blue one out, and then we'll be ready to fuse these two in place. Now when I fuse them in place this time, I am not going to put the iron directly on them because this is where you would destroy the surface texture of that suede. Therefore, with this one, after I have it cut out, I am going to instead get a press cloth. Okay, that one goes on very nicely, and then let's see how this one fits, which it should, since we built the jigsaw, and it should just fit in here. If I can think of where it fit, here's where it fit, and then I had other pieces that would fit in later. But with these two pieces, I want them far enough apart that I can see that fabric come through so that it all looks very nice. And here's where I do need a press cloth. Anything will do for a press cloth. I don't have a great commercial one here. I just have a scrap of fabric and it will do. Anything that will withstand the heat of the iron. Now anytime you fuse any of these synthetic suedes, the press back there is a great place to do it because it gives the right pressure and it gives steam and it gives the temperature setting that you want, and also it gives the right time. You can time it on that. There's a little blip when it's all finished. Here I have to sort of count through, or at least leave it down here long enough that it will fuse. But there it's fused in place, and once it's fused, then it's a very simple matter to just stitch this on machine. And here, of course, I am not going to use any of the bias because the reason I used the ultra suede in the first place is because the edges don't fray. You therefore don't need to cover it with bias. So on this one, it would simply be a matter of stitching through. Now, of course, I'm using contrasting thread, which it wouldn't look too wonderful on the actual finished piece. I would instead keep changing the thread color so that it would go with the suede. But you can see how easily this stitches. It really is quite simple. And the fact that things are fused together also, this simplifies it because it stiffens it enough that you don't have to hold it too carefully. You can just very easily manipulate it. So no problems here. I'll stitch this one on a little bit, and but you get the idea. No bias tape needed as long as you have no ravelly edges. Anyway, let's try a little bit of that at home if this appealed to you and see what you can do. Well, I'm not just sure where I'm going to be able to wear this vest. I haven't worn it out in public yet. Now the tote bag, that's easier. I can wear that a lot because I really felt comfortable with this tote bag, with its design and so on. I really felt comfortable in this. This is just to my liking. I will wear both pieces undoubtedly, but not together. One at a time is enough. So one or the other. I'm also going to wear this bag because it's such a small thing that it's easy to wear. I like it and I will wear it, but not with the other pieces. So another piece that I've done that is not quite the same as this, I did this a while back, but just to give you an idea that you can do dressy things with this. This is dressy. This is a halter top. It's to be worn for evening whenever. You can do that as well as casual things such as I'm wearing. Well, in the meantime, if anyone's having a quilt festival, invite me. I'm ready. About this purse that I just showed you with its suede pieces, join us next week and I'm going to help clarify your thinking and dispel your fears maybe about cutting and sewing ultra suede.